Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg.
You're watching a YouTube video. Good day, folks. I hope you're having a good day. Fuck. In today's video, we're going to be talking about suffering. What's new? But anyways, we're going to be talking about how you can end suffering. And I'm not talking about any extreme methods. I'm talking about ancient religious teachings.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
From early Buddhist texts. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the concept of samsara, what exactly it is, how suffering happens, and how you can end the process of suffering by reaching nirvana. Okay, so let's get right into it. What exactly is samsara? Well, it is this image of an endless wheel of suffering with no exact beginning or end. It may remind you of other mystical symbols such as the Ouroboros, which is the image of the serpent eating itself, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later because this actually does help explain what samsara is. But before we get into any of that stuff, what we need to address first when talking about samsara is karma. You've probably heard this term be thrown around before, like, oh, you've got good karma or you've got bad karma. And that's a very surface level understanding of what karma is. Karma can be thought of the driving force of samsara. So it's sort of the suffering that you are experiencing. That is what karma is. And karma can really be just about anything. But basically it is just going to perpetuate a cycle of suffering within your life. So the way karma personifies itself in each individual's life is different based on the individual. But it's essentially a problem that you need to make peace with. But first, you need to become aware of the problem to begin with. And this is a very difficult thing to do, to become aware. It's also a very painful thing to do. But the good news is, once you have become aware of your karma, made peace with it, then that cycle ends and a new one begins. Yeah! But that's where the themes of death and rebirth come from. If you're vaguely familiar with Buddhism and samsara, you've probably heard that it has something to do with death, rebirth, and reincarnation, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But first, let's address the Ouroboros and how it relates to samsara. As I just mentioned, there is a cycle of beginnings and ends and births and deaths going on. And this pertains to the Ouroboros, but first, actually, I want to talk about, this is actually something that snakes do. And funnily enough, this also helps explain samsara. So what happens with a snake is that they may get confused and view their tail as a separate snake. So then they'll go and eat the tail, thinking that it's another snake. But then they'll feel their tail getting eaten. So this triggers their fight or flight response. So they just keep eating themselves. This relates to samsara because this is what suffering is. When you desire something, you're basically projecting an internal quality that you already possess, but you feel like you lack, onto something external. So, for example, let's just say that you want a smoking hot babe girlfriend, because who doesn't, right? But you're attracted to Becky over there, and you really want affection from the opposite sex, and you think Becky is like the perfect wife. So you go and you ask Becky out, you're like, hey, can I get your number, Becky? And then she says, I don't talk to freaks like you! And then you go home and you feel just embarrassed, and then the cycle perpetuates itself. So let's kind of recap here, just so we can keep going ahead with what karma exactly is. So samsara is caused by fear and desire. And whenever you desire something, you are perceiving yourself as lacking something. And that is what causes suffering. So this can really personify itself in many different ways. That's why it's kind of a very difficult process, becoming aware of what exactly is going on in your life. It's also a very painful thing to admit these things to yourself. So that too. But if you think about this for a while and really dig into this whole of samsara and karma and everything, you'll probably get to a point eventually where you realize that you're just projecting meaning onto the external world, and meaning doesn't actually exist out here. So this does raise larger questions about the meaning of life, but let's just focus on the scary part of life, which is death, right? So when you die, supposedly, you can reincarnate. That's just something that people say. Whether or not it's true, nobody really knows, right? We have no idea. But the idea that reincarnation is just after we physically die is not true. See, let's go back to this image of the cyclical thing. When you're talking about patterns in your life, there are multiple beginnings and multiple ends to karmic cycles within a single lifetime. So you can really go through multiple phases of karma within your one life. And in fact, you do. When you break down the word of reincarnation, Google might define it as something like the soul inhabiting a new physical body or something like that, but that is a very limiting way of looking at reincarnation. A better way to look at it is if you actually break down the word of reincarnate. What the word is saying is reincarnate, to become flesh again. So in other words, when you're talking about samsara, karma, reincarnating in your life, you're talking about the personification of behavioral problems that you may or may not have. And you also could not have any behavioral problem. And that leads us into the last and final subject of this matter, which is the end of suffering. What exactly is the end of suffering? Well, that's what's called nirvana. And no, silly, I'm not talking about the band with Kurt Cobain. I'm talking about like Siddhartha, okay? So how do you become enlightened? Because if you are enlightened, supposedly you no longer suffer. You don't experience any kind of suffering at all. And this is a very long, complicated process that can supposedly take either one lifetime or lifetimes, because again, this is going off the idea that supposedly you can reincarnate. The way to reach enlightenment is to follow the Buddhist teachings known as the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path. Now again, it's not like you have to do this or Buddhism is the only path to enlightenment. There are actually other paths to enlightenment, but this is just one that I'm talking about today. If you read these teachings, they will teach you about how suffering comes into being and how you can get out of that pattern, that cycle. Anyways, I think that will be it for this video. If I missed anything, or if you would like to add anything on to what I said, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you have any questions, I can also answer them to the best of my ability. And if I don't know the answer, I may be able to lead you to the right place where the answer may be. So yeah, that'll be it for this video. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. That really means everything to me. That's what keeps me going. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye.